So it's June 2nd, and we are on our Rising Man call on Sunday. And we're talking about a lot when it comes to man's identity and sex and dating post divorce, post relationship, or maybe just in general. But one of the things that we have in our culture is there's a huge distortion about masculinity, about femininity, about sex, and how these people partake and interact. And we have this huge social definition of what this is supposed to look like. And this is where the fundamentals of a lot of disempowerment come in. We have women that think in order to be attractive, they have to fit an anorexic image of life with plastic surgery and a certain sort of power. And this is going to fulfill the natural need they have that's been in deficit from our culture. And we have men that see power and steroids and having a certain look, a certain mentality, a certain mindset, enough success and all these different things is going to somehow put them in a position where they can finally fulfill their sexlessness that our culture gives them. So we have these two things of the masculine and feminine moving in this horrible area. And even worse about all of this is at this point, probably viewers have popped off not watching the rest of this video because it's about something immature, about something that is not important, about something that is only going to give them some animalistic part to them that is not going to serve them. And a man going through a divorce, I get that, or there's other things going on in your life. Maybe you do need to focus on your case. Maybe you need to focus on these different things. But this is one of the core problems. I hate this, is being a coach for men for 18 years and seeing Google or YouTube or whatever search engine diminish you because you're talking about these things, and then uplifting people who fit a narrative of PC culture's definition of what sex and healthy, positive femininity, masculinity, relationships, polyamory, whatever it is, to be lifted up in the search engines is pathetic. Like, all of my stuff comes from huge amounts of experience working with men in this. And working with men who are going through problems with relationships, sex, dating, post-divorce, or just regular guys, or going through a big breakup, or those types of things, it is one of the hardest things because men are emasculated sexually in a divorce. They're emasculated before their divorce, even though they might not think it through our culture. But when divorce or a custody battle happens, it is felt at the core. They start to see, it's like the Matrix is revealed and they go, oh my God, our culture is against us. But the thing is our culture is fundamentally flawed with everybody sexually. It is fundamentally flawed. And where we need to get to with it is back to our core nature, back to this thing of sex is being seen as one of the most normal things in our nature. It is natural for us to feel. It's through all of our evolution. It's through every single point of human community, manifestation of culture, all these different things, sex is there. And it is more natural for us to be a sexual person, to have sexual desires, to have sexual thoughts, to have fulfillment from sex, desires towards it, desires for it in all these different ways than to drive a car, to work a calculator, to work with anything that's machined or, of modern technology. It is something that is in our nature that we diminish and don't want to talk about. And so what's interesting about all of this is when we get to this fundamental problem of guys going through a big point of change in their life. And in a lot of the guys, it's a divorce or a custody case. And we think that sex is something that shouldn't be talked about or that can only be immature. And we're just recreating the problem over and over again. There's so much to this. Like when I was writing my book, and I'm still writing it and all these different things, I was looking at why would anybody want to listen to me? Why is it that I did all this work and I didn't see other people doing it? Now I get there's plenty of other coaches out there and it's a big industry and all this sort of stuff, but why is it that I worked so devoutly with every single one of the modern man's problems? Addiction, PTSD, vets, divorce, custody, suicidal thinking, abuse victims, all these different things that men, that it's cited at in the manosphere and all these different things that's cited as the problems with men, but none of them came up with solutions for it. Why did I do it? How did this come? And I started out as a dating coach, and how did that industry blow up? And everybody wants to look at it as if misogyny and the patriarchy propelled it into existence. Well, where did that come from? And when we look at all of that, There was a men's movement that started in the 80s and the 90s, and it was really great stuff. And Robert Bly wrote, Iron John, and we have the King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. We have all of these people, Martine Prachtal saying all these amazing speeches, these amazing books being put out. Why did nobody listen? Why didn't it work? And what did work? What worked was amazing, because the real men's movement, when you really think about this, of men coming together, talking about fundamental problems of men, started with the pickup artist industry, a ridiculous industry led by clowns, led by a guy that dressed up and did magic and wore boots that made him, he was already tall, made him 6 inches taller, and a top hat, and people dressing up with silver suits and velvet jackets and all the why was that the thing that people were listening to? And also in that, there was a grouping of men that talked about the most misogynistic way of meeting women. Why did that work? And why didn't the King, Warrior, Magician, Lover take off? Why didn't Iron John influence men in the way that it was supposed to? Why was that ignored? And when we think about this, is that our culture was so sidetracked. And what I got from working in the early pickup industry was that every single one of those guys was answering some sort of advertisement for some sort of, David D'Angelo saying attraction is not a choice. I could say certain words and a woman would have no choice but to be attracted to me. And this was the way. Why would so many men be answering that call? And I had the great fortune of meeting the men who answered that call, because back then the economy was doing good. The economic crash hadn't happened in 2009. People had lots of money in this industry that was $1 billion industry, still is. It was moved by men who had therapists, psychologists, who had all these different things, right? Who had all the access points. And the men who hired me and hired other coaches, like I did that interview with Owen Cook, the men who hired them were wealthy men. Federal judges, there were Academy Award winners, there were people that were athletic champions, there were people that had PhDs, there were lawyers, and then the kids were all kids that had like a trust fund or got rich early on, those types of things. But it was not poor people who did this. And every single one of those guys, at least the ones who were more affluent in society, had tried therapy, had gone to different people, but they were told answers that didn't work. And what's even more sad about this is there were a bunch of people who couldn't afford it, who were told wrong answers. And these are like the vets who were told that PTSD was an anxiety disorder or something dealing with anxiety. They were given false prescriptions, false medications, and it caused a great horrible thing that still exists to this day, that still the psychological and psychiatric communities are guilty of misdiagnosing men's problems and giving them false answers that work for a little bit that create a bigger problem later on down the road. This is insane that this happened, but it makes sense when you look back on it. Everybody was given a false answer. And of course, you are going to look at the answers that are going to fulfill your pain. And this was this hyper-misogynistic message. Now, here's what's amazing. Everybody was lying. So when we get feminism and PC culture saying, oh my God, like, look at these horrible men. Here's what I got from this. Here's what I got from working in the pickup industry. And I don't know many exceptions to this. A guy comes in, he's all tortured by all these things, and he had heavy problems and heavy pain. Every single one of them. None of them wanted to talk about that, but every single one of them had that. And they wanted to fuck tens, have multiple women, have same night lays, and be able to date freely and have women want them. This was the general goal that everybody had. And as soon as they got a few partners, a girlfriend, or one of these things, generally they dropped off out of the seduction community and they were good. So they never got the result of hypermisogyny, and they weren't able to do it, but they all answered that ad. And then everybody talked about it, and it was like a big thing. The real people that were doing these things were not the people talking about it. The real people that were doing the coercive techniques and like taking advantage of women, these were sociopathic people. These guys who answered the ads were dedicated to do that and couldn't do it. And the people teaching didn't do it either because they were lying about it. And there were very, very few people that were able to even come close to that. And the people that were really doing it had nothing to do with the dating and seduction community. And that is amazing in itself. And see, this is the thing. When I get down to helping men through sex and all these different things, and seeking all these different things out, why was it me that came into this? Because before this, I was living out of a car. I was a punk rock dude. I was living as a thief all over the U.S. I worked as a waiter sometimes, as a photographer sometimes. But I was basically just this scumbag dude. I wasn't an educated dude. I wasn't any of these things. I had been in lots of chemical dependency rehabilitation centers. I was familiar with that therapeutic process. I'd volunteered in it, worked in it tons of times, and that was one of the things that helped me. And then maybe I had some other gifts that came into it. But why was it me? Well, the answer for men had to come from the outside of our culture. It had to. It had to. It had to come from somebody who could make changes within themselves that understood the depth of men's problems in this world and not the social answer to it. And when you look at it like addiction, PTSD, sex, loneliness, depression, overwork, lack of identity, worthlessness, all these different things, what is the PC cultural answer to those? Be yourself. Just get over it, find a hobby, work with some therapeutic thing, do yoga, get in touch with the feminine, open up your heart. And what happens, and let's look at this, because everybody hates a misogynist person who has those beliefs and desires, even though they could rarely pull it off. I agree, there are people that do that, but the people that are seeking this out are pained men. But let's look at a vet. He goes to a yoga thing. He tries to open his heart. He can't do it. And then what is his answer when it doesn't work? By the instructor, by the culture, by the people. It's that, well, man, sorry, it worked for this person. Here's this example. He's a vet too. He did it. He had a spiritual, he listened to us. He got in touch with the feminine, and you can't do it. Well, this guy, if you understand things about PTSD, if you understand things about these guys, they're already not wanting to be social in their attempt to do that. And once again, another false solution, a solution that doesn't even work. A solution that may get you some results. For the rare few it does, but ultimately it causes a greater problem again, which then we get to the greater problem, the manosphere, man. We get a bunch of angry guys relying on terrorism, on power, on force, of forcing women to change, of seeing them in this way, and yet none are actually solving these problems. So I kind of got sidetracked on this, but this is a huge, huge thing of when you see this work. When I saw this work in my coaching and reflecting back on it, of the men that came to me, of the very first guy who I did a one-on-one with that just wanted to date more women, an immigrant, disenfranchised by everything, didn't want to be poor like the country that he came from, was running from that, wanted to be like the image of an American guy and doing everything he could desperately do to get that. There wasn't an answer for him to be proud about who he was as a human being that would actually work. It was a PCBS false answer. The next guy that came in was even worse, because he was a guy whose fiance had died. He sat with her through her whole death, walked her through it, and couldn't feel good about dating. Went through psychologist after psychologist, went on medication with different psychiatric forms, and it didn't help him. And so he came to me. He came to me as an answer. Why would you do that? That's just stupid. It didn't work. But why did it work? Why did it help him? Why did it? And the last thing he said to me on our 4-day work thing, we were still friends to this day, from 2006 or whatever, when we started, was, Steve, I couldn't talk to anybody. All the psychologists, all the therapists told me to do this and that, to just respect women, to start off nicely, but they didn't give me permission to be a man. And you were this guy that was in pickup, that wasn't so crazy, that had empathy, that got these different things and so on. And I wanted to talk to you. So you're doing good work and and there's a whole story to it. That's why they came to me. And the sad thing is there aren't many people who had my perspective in this. It was all money, sex, power, money, sex, power, money, sex, power. So when we get to this man in sex, it is so important to understand that this is a fundamental part of your nature. You don't need to have it the way that you think you need to have it, or you can if you want. You don't need to have it how society tells you how to have it. You need to get in touch with you. You need to get in touch with how that fits into your identity. You need to get in touch with how that affects your drive. You need to understand that you're starting off from a point of repression. That doesn't mean that you need to rebel. That doesn't mean you need to be angry. It doesn't mean that you need to go have sex with a bunch of people. It doesn't mean you need to objectify somebody. It doesn't mean you need to hate women. It means that you need to get back into the balance of your masculinity needs to have outputs and vision and drive and want women, but that is fulfilled and completed and calmed down and set back into balance by women. That doesn't mean that it needs to fit into a monogamous relationship, and it doesn't mean that it's against that either. It doesn't mean that you have to have a girlfriend and hold hands in these ways. It doesn't mean that you need to objectify women either. It could be both or all of those things, and our culture is so screwed up that every single one of those things it says is wrong. And the right answer that it gives you is to, well, respect, have conversations about sex, and that consent needs to happen in these ways, and that you don't want to cause harm. And women are coming from pain, but your pain isn't so bad as a man. And so you should think about all this sort of advice that is not looking at the big picture. And I just want to emphasize this. It is not that you need to throw that all out the window and say, okay, well, we can give pain and objectify. That women, you don't need to respect their pain. You do. You should totally look at it. That's not, I'm not disputing that, but we are looking at it in the wrong way. Meaning, if I start conducting my sex life based on the fear of a woman who has been hurt, and I agree she has been hurt, but I get her pain, her unresolved pain, or her moments of working through that pain and not getting to a point of understanding the true balance and need of a man or men and women or whatever the dynamic is, but as a man is, and I don't allow him to go through his repression, his belittling, his diminished sex drive, his fantasies not being able to be worked out, we deny a huge part of the human experience. The human phenomenon of every single one of your emotions, every single one of your points of connectivity, every single one of your points of empathy, seduction, drives, ambitions to do more in the world comes from you being a human experiencing the world. You can't outthink your experience. We can experience and talk about it and gain more intelligence through it. We can experience, go through the process. We could go through a huge breakup. One of the things we're talking about is that, yeah, you're going to start having sex again. You're going to feel weird. You're going to feel depressed. You're going to feel sad. You're going to have bad sex. You're also going to have good sex and feel like a god. None of that is you. All of that is a part of this experience that you need to bring back into balance. That part, that great part of masculinity. And this is the thing that I urge men as we look at how much the pained feminine has then gone on to raise kids, to dictate how men date, to dictate how men view women, and how the flaws that came from that. Some of it was probably right. Some of it was probably good. But the single mothers of the 80s and the 90s and the early thousands and even now moving into raised generations of kids that didn't get to know their dad, that hated their dad for a long period of time. All those guys hired me that thought that respect was the right way to have a woman and just be yourself because that's what they were told by their pained female culture of what to do right and how to date. And then they realized it was a lie, so they might as well throw it out and we're going to just listen to some misogynistic asshole and how we're supposed to date. What we should learn from that is that caused massive pain to men and women as they grew up 15, 10, 20 years later. And it left them lost without understanding why their relationships couldn't work, why they felt unfulfilled, why that our culture moves forward with exploiting sex as something to sell but not actually talk about, but have a cultural PC educational anthem about it, but not the reality of it. We need to understand as men, as we work through this pain, as we as diminished men of our culture who are turned into objects, that think it's okay to objectify, that understand that we have pain and we have a whole sea of PC culture influenced by the pained feminine, saying that you just need to feel and process it and it's okay. And we start borrowing and rewriting those ideas. No, we need as men to start taking back control of our lives, of our masculinity and experiencing it how we can. Part of that's going to be with sex. Part of that's going to be with ambition. Part of that's going to be building and making things. Part of that's going to be making money. Part of that might be going into the internal and exploring more of yourself. But you need to do it as a man with the body that you were born into and find the virtues of that. and calm that down, and then we can move forward with what is right and wrong. But this whole idea of a tug of war of masculine and feminine being better or worse is the most anti-sexual thing that you can do. This idea of solving the man's sex life through just having sex and not being responsible for it is ridiculous and will only cause pain. I'm somebody, and if you get from my calls, I don't care if you want to be celibate. I don't care if you want to be a monk. I don't care if you want to do these things, but do them like you want. But if you want to go and have sex, you can have all the sex that you want, and you can have it in all the ways that you want. But it has to be understood that it is more powerful than you. It will change you and it will shape you. And if you decide to not listen to it, if you put nature in a box, it will break out of that box. And if your beliefs, your mindset, your body, your way of life, your culture that you build for yourself is that box, it will break it and it will move it. In many, many ways, we are a slave so much to our nature. Of course, we could eat different foods, design our bodies in the right way. We can also design our sex in the right way, but we have to understand that we are a slave to certain things of our nature when it comes to our sex. It starts with you. It starts with understanding you as a man, and it starts with you going out and having it in ways where you are fully engaged in it. There's obviously so much I could say about it. Everybody, whenever they see these videos, if they sit through them, they're like, oh, what's the solution? Well, it depends what you want to do. If you feel emasculated as a man, find your masculinity with yourself. It's not just lifting weights and joining a jiu-jitsu gym. I do plenty of that shit. It's not just going out and fucking chicks. I've done plenty of that shit. It means that you integrate yourself and be responsible for it. You study yourself. You study yourself as a sexual man. You realize that your brain changes when you're turned on. You realize that when you are in the act of sex and relationships and choices and dysfunctions that come up, that you have to feel and be responsible for that. One of the best ways to do that is to talk to men. You know, if I put guys in a circle and talk about their sexual dysfunctions and they talk about it, and then we go out and we have sex, it takes time. It's not quick, but it resolves itself. It moves in these different ways. We have to understand that experience is important. And your sex is not unimportant. It's mandatory in your change. It's mandatory that you get in touch with it. And it's mandatory that you start respecting it. If that means dating, if that means casual sex, if that means relationships, or if that means going into and joining a monastery and not just being in monk mode and actually being a monk and taking on the responsibility of that. It means going through the pain of letting all of those things go. In any case, I'm going to get back to this call. We're actually about to wrap it up, so I want to answer questions for the guys. There's so much that we've been talking about this. I think it's fundamentally important for men to be having this discussion, in the fact that it's hard to in our culture. It's seen as immature. It's seen as ridiculous. It only causes a greater problem for some clown of society to start offering a solution to people because men are so frustrated, pissed off, angry, in deficit, that they start listening to that and taking it seriously. And hopefully one of those clowns can have an answer that actually helps work men back to a solution. If you're interested in the groups, check the links in the bio. We'll talk to you guys later.